Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to this recording, which was a LinkedIn Live, but is being re-recorded due to technical problems. To what does your data ecosystem say to you? With me, Justin York. Over the next 20 minutes or so, we'll be going through talking about ecosystems, what they are, how we see them, what questions we can ask to understand them a little bit better, um, what challenges we might got, the impacts of those things, and what we can do to understand things just a little bit better. So let me start with a question for you to think about. If your data ecosystem could talk, what would it be saying to you? Would it be saying, you don't know where I am? Or maybe it would be saying, you don't know if you could trust me. Or maybe it would be saying, lots of people use me, but nobody owns me. Now, over the past 20, 30 years, when I've been working around in the data business across various organizations and projects and programs, these are exactly the things that spring to mind. These are the things that I observe and I hear. Now, many organizations will say to you, data is the lifeblood of our business. Now, that's a bit old hat these days, but they might say to you, we're going to be data driven, or maybe we are data driven, whatever that means to different organizations. They might be saying, we're going to do a lot more AI. We're going to do a lot more advanced diagnostics. Or they might even say that we want to implement data governance. But all of those things require an understanding of your ecosystem. These things need to be based on solid foundations. The ecosystem are those solid foundations. Think of great structures in the world, the pyramids of Giza, Parthenon of Athens, numerous skyscrapers around the globe. They're built on solid ground. And they make sure they've got good foundations before they start building the structures. And that's just the same with lifeblood, AI, analytics. You need to have solid foundations, and that is your ecosystem. Now, lots of people don't really understand their ecosystems that well. And that's not because they're lazy or they don't care or they're not smart. It's because ecosystems evolve over time, different budgets, different tech stacks, different initiatives that come in, different priorities. And all of these things affect our understanding of our data ecosystems. Now, I use 6 questions that I ask organizations about their ecosystems to try and get them to understand just how much they know or don't know about their ecosystems. We'll start with, what data do you have? Now, I'm not talking about 16 tables full of address details or postcodes or dates of birth, all that kind of stuff. Not talking about that. What we're talking about here is high-level, big chunks of data. Imagine you're in a manufacturing organization. You might have production, operations, logistics, warehousing. You might have finance and HR. All of those things could be possible. But let's just stick with HR for a moment. Because in a big organization, you might have executive data. You might then have employee data, and you might have third-party contractor data. And whilst the attributes, or a lot of the attributes, will be the same, you might want to treat them differently. So we keep them as separate chunks of data. So once we know what we've got, we need to then understand where it is. Because 50 years ago, you would have found finance data in a finance system, and logistics data in a logistics system, and so on and so forth. But as organizations have had the need to do more reporting, more analytics, more dashboards, they've created warehouses. Now, warehouses contain copies, in some cases, partial data sets. In other cases, they just take the whole data set. and put it in the warehouse. So now you have data in your source system and you have it in your warehouse, and you can create your reports and analytics and all that kind of stuff out of the warehouse. Or you might have a data lake, or you might have a swamp, right? Bit of a joke with the swamp. But we have this stuff. So I worked on a program 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago, where we were rationalizing logistic information systems in the UK MOD. And I sat in on a meeting with lots of contractors and consultancies, and they were all talking about, well, we'll rationalize this, we'll migrate that, we'll decommission something else. And then I naively asked the question, I said, well, do we know what we actually have? There's lots of puzzled looks, which will loosely tell you that no, nobody really knew. Was there an inventory? Possibly. Was it complete? Don't know. So I spent the next 7 weeks going away and finding out what that looked like. And when I went back to the meeting, I then put up my diagram I created with 364 logistic information systems, and where I knew it, the connectivity between those systems. Now, all of a sudden, something that seemed relatively easy, we'll rationalize this, migrate that, became very complex, and it changes the whole idea of what you're trying to do. So now we know what we have and where it is, we now have to consider how does it move around? Because data moves around in various ways. In the modern world, we're using pipelines. We've got pipelines taking data out of source systems and moving it into warehouses so we can do our analytics and reporting. But we have these things and we don't really understand a lot of the time what it is and how often these things work. Now, in the olden days, we used to have things called interface control documents, and those documents used to say to us a description of what the interface was, when it fired, when did it move, what data did it move, and more importantly, names of contact names of people at either end of the interface should it go wrong. Today, you will probably call those data contracts, but we need to know how it moves around because some of it might, for example, if you're in a big organization, HR, you may outsource your payroll to a third-party provider who's external to you. So we need to know how it gets there. Once we know those three things, the what, the where, and the how, we then have to think who is using this data and what for, because not all data is equal. I've been in an organization where somebody has taken a value from a table and said, because it said total, they said, oh, that's just the total I'm looking for. Looks like the right thing. I'll just use that in my dashboard. Except it wasn't calculated in the way that they needed it for their dashboard. So the number wasn't any good. So we have to understand who is using it and what for. More importantly, should they have access to it, like HR data, for example, or sensitive finance information. We then need to know who owns this stuff, who makes the decisions, who is going to apply resource if we find that we've got a problem with the data, who is going to apply that, who's going to make those decisions. And then when we know that, we then have to understand the quality of it. How good is the data we are actually using? Who has decided? Because the consumers of the data should decide what makes it fit for purpose and what doesn't. So have they decided it? What are the standards? And as a quick tip, 100% is not the right answer. Because the closer you get to 100%, the more difficult it is, the more effort you have to expend, the more it costs you to get to 100%. And even safety critical systems will not give you a guaranteed 100%. Now, if you can answer these questions confidently, then you've got a good handle on your ecosystem. If you can't, you might come across some of the responses to challenges that I have seen in the past. So here's some examples. I think we understand, but I'm not sure. So they don't know. Oh yeah, there was somebody who knew about that. Yeah, that was Bob. Yeah, he left about a year ago. And that's no good either. And you can substitute whichever name or whichever hero you've got that would fit into that mold. Or somebody might say, but it's documented, isn't it? Or by definition of the fact they're asking a question, not making a statement, you would probably say, maybe. Is it up to date? Somebody might say, is it in the code? It's in the code. Well, the thing about coding and developers is that they like doing the sexy, exciting stuff. They like cutting code. They're not great documenters. So you better be able to read Python, whatever your preferred language is. Or maybe they'd say, we've got lots of stuff around, but it's not working that well. We're not entirely sure, what it does. And I've worked in projects and programs where the systems have been left, and we had one that had just had a license renewed. It sat in the corner, all the lights were on, nobody was home, nobody was using it, there was no registered users, no data flowed in and out of it, and we checked for weeks, never did. So eventually we said, well, why don't we just disconnect it from the network? So we took it off the network. 3 weeks later, has anybody called? Has there been any emails? Anybody any panicking? No. So we switched it off. So we don't need that anymore. My personal favorite is we've got a workaround for that. Oh, yeah. Okay. What's your workaround? Oh, yeah. Bob created that. Remember, Bob left about a year ago. Yeah, we don't really know why we do it. Yeah, but we've got a workaround. All of those things will create impacts for you in your business, all of them. So some of those impacts might be that you don't have the trust and confidence that you would like in the data. And if you don't have trust and confidence, people will double check, they'll triple check all of the numbers. That slows things down. That then delays your decision making. You cannot make as fast and good decisions because everything is not trusted. Even worse than that, you might be making big decisions based on shaky foundations. And shaky foundations are never a great place to be making executive decisions from. If we don't really trust it and we can't make decisions, then how do we move forwards with innovation? Because we can't really innovate if we don't know what it is that we're innovating from. What is the platform that we're innovating from? And finally, we get to efficiency. We are not going to be efficient if there are people in the organization who are having to constantly fix things that are not their problem, they're not responsible for, but they fix them because it gets the job done. And there might be somebody who's spending 10 or 15 minutes every day doing this stuff, and they don't need to be doing it. So all that is all well and good. So we've got the challenges, and we've asked the questions, we've got the challenges, and we've got the impacts. And somebody might then say, well, this is exactly why we need data governance. And they would be right. Or maybe they'd be wrong. Because data governance is often introduced with a concept of control, of process, of additional effort. And all of those things might be true because data governance is there to apply controls to the data. Because remember, if we want to know who's using it and what for, then we have to know through a control mechanism who has access to that data. Processes are there for us to follow. Processes should be followed because it's a standard way of doing something. We don't put processes in to be deliberately difficult. We put them in so that we follow them the same way every time, so that if something goes wrong, we can then track back through that process and find out what happened. But if we're halfway through and somebody's implemented Bob's workaround, to remember who left a year ago, then we don't know why it failed. Then we have to search around and scratch about until we find what that problem was. So when we're in that position, we're not understanding the ecosystem. And the reality of life is that we shouldn't have to do those things. We shouldn't need to do that because data governance in and of itself is not the goal that we are striving for. What we're striving for is clarity, confidence, ownership, and safety. That is what we are looking for. That is what we are trying to achieve. Because when we achieve those things, then we can make those better decisions. We can innovate. We'll have trust and confidence. We'll have clear ownership of that data. That's what we need. Because if we don't do that, then we don't understand our ecosystems that well. Now, all of that said, we're talking about people all the time here. This is all about people. And so we're really talking about change. So you can have all the frameworks, you can have all the policies, you can have all the tooling and all the operating models you like. They, in and of themselves, do not fix or do anything. It's only when people use those things do we actually get any real benefits or results. When we think about change, there will be different perspectives in an organization. So I worked in an organization, we're talking to some executives, and somebody who I know and respect put their data policy on the table, and an executive stood up, tore it into shreds, threw it back on the table and said, not worth the paper it's written on, and sat down. Now, we did have some buy-in from some other executives, but that they changed their position a little bit because this guy had influence over them. So we had to do a lot of work then to get people back on side. So different perspectives will drive different things. And the different perspectives are going to create issues with alignment. We need people to be pulling in the same direction all the time. Because if they're not, we fragment. If we fragment, because of those perspectives, we move further away from the goal of what we are trying to achieve. If we don't have alignment, we can build up quite a lot of resistance to change. Resistance to change generally comes in because people don't understand the what and the why. So what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And then more importantly, they don't understand what is in it for them. Because if you don't know what's in it for you and you don't know why you're doing it, why would you sign up to it? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But then what happens is we end up with unclear ownership. And unclear ownership means everybody's owning it, nobody's owning it. And so we don't have the decisions. We don't get those decisions that we need. We don't get resources applied when we have a problem. But as I've said before, data governance in and of itself is not the goal. Remember, we're looking for clarity, confidence, ownership, and safety in the data. To get that, we have to get people to think differently about the data, to act differently around the data and make different decisions on the data. And to do that, they have to have the confidence to understand the data ecosystem, that strong foundation that's holding everything up. So I'm going to leave you with that question I began with. If your data ecosystem could talk to you, what would it say? Would it say you're in control, or would it say that you are guessing? Because if you're in control, that's great. If you've got a real understanding of your data ecosystem and you're fully in control of what is going on, that would be absolutely brilliant. But if you're guessing, that's not so good. We don't want to be guessing. We need to work from a basis of good understanding. And if we are guessing, well, it's not a great position to be in. But more importantly, it's what are you going to do about it? So if any of this has resonated with you, then I'm launching a diagnostic tool next week. And if you'd like a link to that diagnostic tool, then please do put diagnostic in any comments or send me a DM on LinkedIn, and I will make sure that you get a link to that diagnostic tool when it's released next week. So other than that, if you celebrate Easter, have a wonderful Easter. If you don't celebrate Easter, have a wonderful weekend. And all that's left for me to do is to say, I apologize for the technical glitches that happened during the live. I'll try and make sure that they're ironed out for the next one. And have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks very much.